I don't know if Bitcoin's going up, but in actual fact, your money's just going down. No matter what you're told, inflation's here, the debt is out of control, and I think the lifeboat is Bitcoin.
Unrealized capital gains to me is just absolute insanity. I'm not approving of what I consider the theft of our money.
Fundamentally, it's flawed. There's, trying to do control over the internet, control over your money systems, control over everything, and now control over your retirement. If you don't believe Bitcoin is going to take over the financial world, the existence of Bitcoin holds them to an account, because if there's no way for you to exit the system, you're sort of stuck in whatever is done to you versus you taking control of your own economic future.
That's exactly right. I always say that Bitcoin is the answer. I'm Matthew Fraser, and this is Crypto Collective. After making millions with Amazon and e-commerce, I realized that if I was starting again today, crypto would be my first choice. I'm here to help you take your first steps and build real wealth. Ready to set yourself up for life? Let's go. Joining us today is Darren Rogan, a true pioneer smashing it in blockchain, Web3, NFTs, and AI. He's the brain behind Rogues Lab and the driving force of the Gold Coast blockchain meetup. Let's jump into it. All right. Well, hey, Darren, thank you so much for joining me on Crypto Collective, all the way from the Gold Coast, which is fantastic because we're basically neighbors. Hey, good to see you.
Pretty much just down the road. Next time I'll try to come down into the studio.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Now you're big in Web3, NFTs, AI, blockchain. I know you've been in the Bitcoin space since basically day dot, which is going to be absolutely fascinating to pick your brain because you've obviously seen a lot. Just for those people who don't know, just give us the overview of I guess what you're doing now in this crypto Bitcoin space.
So I'm still involved in Bitcoin, still a holder of Bitcoin, big believer. We could talk about energy, unlocking renewable energy. But I'm a coder by trade. I've been doing sort of venture startups for like 15 years. My first startup was out of university, digitizing back catalogs of video for the local TV channel before YouTube. And then I've been doing Web 2 tech work for a long time. I was an entrepreneur in residence at UQ for some of their accelerator programs, and then went full-time into crypto. And then I built in crypto with Ethereum background, and then Solana as well. And I'm also the CEO of Film.Fun, which is a new AI content generation with like episodic mechanisms and token holders and voting and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is coming soon. But yeah, I also run the Gold Coast blockchain meetup education group with about 1,000 members, and I speak at conferences as well.
Okay, guys, so for everyone watching, Darren knows his stuff. Okay, this is going to be not your average interview, so stay tuned. Darren, I have to ask, because having been someone who's been in this space for so long, what was the beginning like? Getting into, I guess let me start with Bitcoin, because I'm guessing back then it's a new technology. I have read the white paper, it was considered this peer-to-peer new money. But it was obviously very, very, I'm guessing it was risky to sort of take out your money and sort of put it into this Bitcoin. So what was it like back then?
Well, my first Bitcoin I mined on a CPU. So a very long time ago. And like, don't get me wrong, I've got an ASIC sitting over there from mining days. But I started just to mine some of it at the start. And I found it, because I'm more of like a very tech person, I find it fascinating to have digital money, and I'd be more on that cyberpunk side of believing that the bank, and I have some funny bank stories, atrocious industry. And I wanted to see like, how could we move value around? I think it's like a missing piece of the internet was the movement of capital. So I found Bitcoin to be fascinating. And I used to use Bitcoin anywhere I saw a Bitcoin sign. So I wish I didn't, in hindsight, to be clear. Buying beef jerky, anywhere I saw a Bitcoin logo, I was straight in buying stuff I didn't even want, because I was like, I believe digital cash. This is before like large growth. So it would have been probably around $6 at that time when I was started sort of like mining, playing with it, trying to code with it. Like, Bitcoin always has been a bit difficult. I remember color coins before Ethereum. So it's been a fascinating part, and I think it is, the global money layer that will sort of dominate. And I think it's like, like the big global money, and then you've got like other layers on top, which is like application layers, but Bitcoin is the core. So I always talk about Bitcoin being the sun of the universe, and everything sort of moves around it.
So just get me this right, because people are going to be watching this, Darren, like, he did what?
Oh,
But of
I
course,
threw
back
I
then,
threw
though,
some out. I
no way.
formatted hard drives. I've bought beef jerky at today's prices. Facebook reminds me because I did a picture of me with the receipt going, look at I spent Bitcoin to buy beef jerky. I think it's about a Ford Mondeo now worth of beef jerky I bought one day. And every couple of years, Facebook just brings it up and goes, remember on this day that, you got a lot of engagement on this post.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh,
Reminds
God,
you.
I wish I'd have kept some. So no, like I
Darren,
actually sold most of my Bitcoin at the $480 range when I was doing a startup, like a Web2 startup, and I liquidated all my assets, including stocks and so forth. And then I put that all in and I funded the company creation, paid for people's staff, and built like a bit of a Web2 startup. So I'm not complaining, like it was still a very nice run for me, but in hindsight, I don't spend a lot of Bitcoin anymore, put it that way.
Yeah, I just want to highlight it because, everyone's got their hindsight story. I heard one the other day of a guy, probably a bit later down the track than you, and he was talking to Gary Cardone, and he said, Gary, I wanted to pay off my mortgage, so I sold 780 Bitcoin to pay off my roughly $400,000 mortgage. And he said that was the biggest mistake I could ever made. Like 780 Bitcoin, you crazy? But I guess, Dan, what I want to get into though is this was the mindset though. You didn't envisage it becoming what it is today. Was it still so speculative?
It was super speculative back then, and I made a very, very nice return. Let's not say that I didn't. It wasn't in the thousands of X's, but at that point, what it did is it gave me an economic freedom to go start something. And I think Bitcoin is all about economic freedom. I think most people come for, the gains, learn about the technology and learn about economic freedom. And I think Bitcoin was also a path for me to learn more about the financial system, how it worked and how it worked against us. So
Yes.
I really do think that, like in hindsight, I wish I didn't sell. Like, let's be clear. But I still, have bought and have sold, over time, and have went into some other coins as well, Ethereum and Solana, and they all work really well in different ways. I do think that the markets have changed a lot over time, and I think they're evolving again. And I believe that, fiat money is fundamentally broken with the constant money printing. Like in Australia, for example, which we currently are, people don't really understand the debt creation of money. So this property boom that we've had over the last 10 years actually impoverishes the nation because most of the money that is created is debt-based money. So it just inflates that money supply. So I sometimes joke that I don't know if Bitcoin's going down, but in actual fact, Bitcoin's going up, but in actual fact, your money's just going down. And the value of that unit of work, that electrodollar, is the thing which is actually holding its value. And as people see the breakages in the financial system and the endless inflation, because the money printer is never going to stop, folks. Like, no matter what you're told, inflation's here, the debt is out of control, and I think the lifeboat is Bitcoin. Like, I'm not so certain on the Lightning or some of the other Bitcoin layer 2s at this stage. So I sort of like moved over to Ethereum because I wanted to code with it. I wanted to use it, and I wanted to do more interesting stuff where Bitcoin was very expensive to use and very hard to use in those microtransactions. And like, don't get me wrong, I think Lightning is a great step forward. I think you're going to find a lot of changes will occur in every network over time because they always will. But yeah, like I'm a big believer in Bitcoin. I'm a big believer in decentralization. I think there's too many monopolies, too many rent seekers extracting your wealth. So for me to be able to give you in that digital cash, bearer asset person to person, I think that is a major invention that will change the world.
Yeah, I totally agree, Darren. I'm all on board, and I've gone down my own rabbit hole. I think it was, really coming out of COVID, and I guess it started with the distrust of those in power, which then made me question a lot of other things. And it was probably around that time I discovered also Michael Saylor, and started listening to what he was talking about. Robert Breedlove is another example. So I started reading up books about what is money and everything you just said. I've been seeing your X account, which I think is extraordinary. I don't know if it gets enough credit, but it is a really good X account. One of the quotes you said there was, "Stories are a fundamental part of communicating with others. The best persuasion is a good story." So what's the best story that you've told in trying to orange pill people into Bitcoin?
I tell them the story of fiat, because most people misunderstand fiat, right? And so that they're coming from a position where they think they're on a steady base. And I remind them that you're actually in quicksand and you are going to sink into that quicksand and you're looking for hard money, right? And then I explain to them that gold is great, but it's really difficult to transact in gold. And then I go down the Bitcoin digital gold, as in it is an asset that holds its inflationary value, that has got a capped hard supply, and then is non-controlled by someone who's going to get bailed out or print more of it to devalue your assets. Because let's imagine that you all have been saving your money to buy property in Australia, which I believe we're in a giant bubble, and you have had 40, 50 grand in savings before COVID. You have now basically sunk into the quicksand with all the printing of money, and then the easy credit, and then the push up of additional property prices, that the average worker will, in Sydney, for example, will never be able to buy property because they can never save enough fiat to outcompete the deflation of the money and the inflation of the asset. So I say that the money is broken. And what other money do you go to? And you look at the dollar from the US, which is, basically a money printer out the wazoo. You look at other assets which are controlled by other states, and you think, well, you've only really got two options here. You've got gold, which I call boomer Bitcoin, and then you've got Bitcoin, all right? And they're the two major options for wealth. And then you can go down that speculative bubble if you want to look at some other coins, being like your Ethereum, which I think more like Visa and MasterCard, the future of Visa and MasterCard. Or then you've got your more highly speculative stuff, but I look at them more like stock rather than money, if that makes sense. So yes. To me, Bitcoin is money. And then these things are like buying a piece of Apple or Facebook or some sort of network business that may become beneficial, but is highly dependent on the success of others within it, because it is a platform business, just like Facebook is a network platform business. I think it's a great example in that sort of mental model that I use. But when we bring back to like, where is the safest form of digital cash, censorship resistant, non-payment, has not changed its issuance. The only big risk we have is like quantum, which you hear people talk about. Quantum's going to break Bitcoin. And I laugh because most people are like fiat people who say that quantum's going to break Bitcoin. And I say, okay, well, imagine Bitcoin is a locked box, right? It's not easy to get into, and you're going to create this, machine that's going to be able to break open this box. Well, think about Visa and MasterCard and the banking systems. They just have a piece of string protecting them. So why are you not going to destroy the fiat system and take everyone's money before you can actually get into the safety deposit box? So while in theory you're right, I'll be the last man standing and you'll be already completely emptied. And then they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. I'm like, yeah. And we can develop quantum resistant algorithms and we can update them. If there's an existential threat to the network, we do upgrades, we do forks, we do change stuff. It would be an enormous big change to change that core algorithm, and it would take a long time. But I'm not suggesting that it'll change overnight. But I also don't think that it's going to happen overnight. I don't believe that that risk is as big as people think it is. Like I'm in startups, I'm in like starting new businesses, that sort of stuff. And the perception out to market is always future facing. It's not the reality today, and it takes a time to get there. And there's a lot of wealth, a lot of money, and a lot of brains in Bitcoin. And if you think that that becomes an existential threat, that the Bitcoin network won't react, figure out the best option and figure out the way to mitigate that. And I think you're just delusional. You're living in a distortion reality bubble where you want to be seen to be right rather than searching for what is right.
Yes, it's interesting. I had someone yesterday who reached out to me who said, "Look, Matthew, because I'm always preaching about. I've got a couple of books right in front of me here. I've got the Bitcoin Standard here.
Have you read the Fiat Standard? I've sent that to a couple of people from the same author, and he explains Fiat in terms of Bitcoin, because in that one he explains Bitcoin in terms of Fiat. And I've sent that to some people, and they're like, because that shakes their underlying world. Because as I was saying, they think they're coming from that steady state, and they're actually on quicksand. And that helped orange pill them, much better than the Bitcoin Standard did, because it actually shook their comprehension.
You showed the problem first, as opposed to the solution.
Yeah, because they're not ready for the solution. So I think that it's a sophisticated conversation where we can only take people to the side of their risk, because there's a thing called change resistance. So there's a certain pace you can go through water, right? And if you try to go too fast, you burn all this energy and you tire yourself, and you can't. But there's an optimum pace that you can get through to make progress against that resistance. And I think people need to go to the resistance point and then get comfortable and then continue down the journey. And I think if we try to pull people over too quickly, which I see some people when they're orange pill them, just dumping so much knowledge onto them, and it's all accurate, don't get me wrong, but it's too far for them to go. It's
overwhelming.
So they get this cognitive dissonance and rejection of like, no, I can't take that all in. So how do we create these like chicken nuggets of value that you eat and you think, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I like that. Can I have another one? Rather than, come into the banquet of like explaining money, fiat, because most people don't understand anything about money. That's how the fiat system works. That's why the banking is in the schools, and McDonald's is teaching, giving kids stuff. We are not trained in Keynesian economics, for example. We don't understand there are different options to the current system, and I think that's by design.
Interesting. You've completely flipped my mind on that, Darren. That in itself was excellent, because you're right. I've been pushing, those who want to know, I guess, and recommending the Bitcoin Standard, thinking this will orange pill them. But I think you might be right. It's actually identifying the problem first with the Fiat Standard.
Yeah. If I'm trying to bring someone in who's like very traditional, I literally just tell them about like risk. So risk decisions. So let's say you've got, $100, and I say, what would happen if you lose $1? And they say, well, not very much. And I say, well, if you can afford to lose $1, then why wouldn't you put it in Bitcoin? If you because it's a bet against a hedged bet against the rest of the system. So if the rest of the system works fine and that goes to zero, then you have no real difference. Okay, but if it is accurate, which is like counter to normal narrative, then that 1% will become more over time than your others. And I change it to sort of like try to strip away, the emotional context, the changing of the world, the changing of the money system, because it gets very charged. And I think that charging and that, because people believe they're on a steady state, which is fair and good, and you're coming in with like almost too much to get them to move to their next change stage. So just bringing them over to it being like economically valuable as an investment is my first path, right? And once I have them over there, that they start to realize that most of the stuff they've been told about Bitcoin is just inaccurate, factually wrong. And then at that point, then I shake their world with the fiat book of like how the fiat system is broken, okay?
Yeah.
And I think some people feel it more than others. The fiat system and the property bubble has worked well for a lot of people. So you've almost got an incentive not to understand that it could be coming to an end. I also use the example that, every market, normally has a correction. I'm from Northern Ireland, and I remember, the GFC, which was very large in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. And it was a major sort of a major collapse of the property bubble, and certain markets don't believe that can happen to them. Just like Bitcoin may come down, right? Any asset may come down, but when you zoom out, which assets are better over time? The other point that I've been starting to make to people a lot is the denominator matters, and this is very true for let's just say it's stock, and I use this as well because I try to remove the emotional connotation to Bitcoin. And like, what's your stock denominated in? Is it a US equity denominated in the US, or is it an Australian equity denominated in the Pacific peso, right? The Aussie dollar. Well, the Aussie dollar has fallen from like 80 cents to 60 cents against the US dollar. So the denominator of this asset has dropped, right? So if I try to reconcile them back into, say, the US dollar, which is still the current global currency, this investment in Australia doesn't matter on its return profile if it doesn't beat the inflation of the money, okay? And the inflated comparable value. So it would have been better for me to just potentially put the money in a US stable coin on blockchain, like a Tether, which is backed by Treasury. So you just buy in a Treasury, you just buy in US. In that instance, just to hold US dollars than it was to potentially buy a stock in Australia due to that coming down. And once I get them to understand like the value change of the assets, then I talk about Forex. Would you prefer to hold, the euro? Would you prefer to hold the dollar? Or would you prefer to hold the Bitcoin? And I think those sorts of reframing is how to try to change people's aspects, because I don't think most people are down the path enough to sort of see the world as we probably see it, as the hyper Bitcoinization that I believe that you'll start to see. Like, it's now on on the balance sheet of countries. Do you know what I mean? We are seeing a strain in the American system, the global financial system. You've got the rise of the BRICS, and like the game theory is that you can't trust either. Who can you trust? You can trust the one which is not controlled, and Bitcoin rises through. And that game theory has been spoken about like over 10 years ago, and I discounted that like 10 years ago. But as we go through, some of these people that seemed like, let's just say, a little out there with some of their theories, they're starting to come more and more realistic. And the other part is, it doesn't even matter if the final state doesn't occur. That competition has got potential benefits. So like, I also say, I think Uber improved the taxi system, okay? Because that competition of Uber made the taxis have to lift their game. But the taxi still keeps some competition to Uber, right? Because it's a big monopoly, and it's not like, it was better than it is today, right? So even if you don't believe Bitcoin is going to take over the financial world, the existence of Bitcoin, the existence of a non-state like inflationary asset, holds them to an account. Because if there's no way for you to exit the system, you're sort of stuck in whatever is done to you versus you taking control of your own economic future. And I believe that those types of like narrative conversations are the things that I try to like open people's perspectives about and let them sort of ruminate on those before we have like deeper conversations around economics and money printing and closeness to the money printer and unfairness in the system, which I just feel is just a step too far.
Hey, just quickly, if you're ready to dive deeper into crypto and Bitcoin and build real wealth, join my free crypto collective community. It's where I share exclusive insights and strategies and live discussions to help you succeed, whether you're a beginner or scaling your portfolio. Click on the link in the description and join us today. Now back to the episode. Someone just asked me today, where do I see Bitcoin? As in, will it be literally the monetary system that we barter in? And I said, I don't see it, and I'm going to get your take on it. I think at this point it looks like the US dollar, for example, will be pegged against Bitcoin, and we've just had the US. Well, I don't know if they announced it, but there was certainly some leaked information about it through Coinbase about selling off some of their gold to allocate to Bitcoin. What do you think is going to happen in the future there, Darren? Will we have literally bartering with Bitcoin, or will we still be using fiat currency potentially backed against Bitcoin?
I would say, even if we went to a final Bitcoin stage, that secondary stage of a backed or pegged would probably be a stepping stone. So I don't believe we get there without a pathway that none of us really want to go down, right? Which is like the collapse of the traditional financial system, and all of the pain that goes with that, and the collapse of Civil War society stuff. So I just hope that does not. I don't see a path forward without Bitcoin becoming sort of like a base asset. I think like if you just look at like stable coins, right, which is on-chain money, which is on a whole bunch of chains, right? Tether is one of the largest purchasers, like as a country state, of U.S. Treasuries, which is U.S. debt, right? So the use of crypto is already sort of propping up the U.S. dollar, because the value on that bond treasury market is actually underpinned by crypto dollars on chain, right?
And let me ask you though, Darren, is Tether backed by Bitcoin?
Tether is not, but as I say, there's a journey through. So Tether is just a claim asset, right? So it's just a claim, and so while it's a step forward, it is not a bearer asset. And even these subdivision that we described of Fiat backed by something, most of those will not have a direct ability to recoup the funds, right? So there'll still be some sort of claim on a base asset. So think of it, if there was like a gold coin, that you still wouldn't have the gold. It's not subdivided into that fashion. I think Bitcoin, a layer 2 could take over with sort of encapsulated fractionalized Bitcoin, but I'm not too certain that the network in its current state will be able to deal with the level of transaction volume, and I'm not certain that it needs to. I think a layered scaling makes sense, and I think most people are okay with like even the Lightning's a little bit of a bartering transfer of funds through and locked in and locked out. So I think that that's possible. I think the only path for the US out of its debt crisis is, one, either a war and resetting the debt system, or two, looking at using Bitcoin as one of the major assets backing it. I think, I can't remember who it was, but I listened to a fascinating podcast where somebody said if they wanted to play like big geopolitical games, they should sell all their gold and buy Bitcoin, because other countries are stacking gold. China and Russia, for example, have large amounts of gold. Now, Russia had its assets seized, its dollars seized, which is sort of hastening the change of the fiat system, because it's no longer a neutral platform, so people can't trust the dollar system. And then you get like the potential rise of the BRICS. But if you really wanted to play that, you could sort of like undermine their gold by going hard into Bitcoin. And I still think that is a potential. And I think that, like, don't get me wrong, I think that would be amazing. I don't think it's a high probability event, but it is sort of in that gamesmanship realms of, dominance and control, and being able to continue dominance over the financial system has, great things for any empire at the end of the day. So that is fascinating. Will it happen? I don't know if it'll happen, in any short time frame. So I wouldn't be making a recommendation that he makes any assignment on there. But yeah, I think that there's a lot more that Bitcoin can do in its current sort of country balance sheet movement, and being used as a base asset for settlements and claims upon it, with a Bitcoin-backed asset. Which will continue over the next decade before those potentialities will probably come in.
Yeah. Well, Darren, moving still within the crypto space, but maybe off Bitcoin, you're doing a lot of work in the AI space. You're also working with other altcoin related companies. Can you talk about that? Sort of what do you do in that space, and also leading into AI?
Yeah. So I've been doing, I'm a deep tech guy, so I've been doing AI for a very long time. Even helped launch an insurance company. We did image generation for hard hats. Funny story, watermelons look a lot like safety helmets. In the US, people were carrying watermelons onto site, and my AI model thought they were bald people, like headless bald people. So I had a funny story where I had to pull a bunch of AI out, probably 9 years ago, of an insurance system that I'd built because of that. So I think AI is another sort of foundational technology leap, right? I think that we have these technology-driven innovation cycles, and they generally make things that were harder easier to do. And they could have been like, some of them are like foundational and some of them are stepped. So like a mobile is like stepped, the internet's like foundational. I think digital money being like crypto is foundational, and I think that AI is foundational. Now I run an advisory firm, so I do advisory work in Web2 startups, and sort of Web3 mostly. Like I'm an advisor on Vana, which does it does cryptographically securing data sets and issues tokens. So it's like a user-owned data. So it tries to break the sort of monopolistic behavior of Facebook and these other platforms that sort of extract all your information and they profit off it, and they never return that money to you. So this is like, you own your own data, so you can bring that data together in like a data collective, and then that can be monetized and you can actually make money off the information that you collect. So that's Vana. I'm an advisor on there. I do some of the grants and ecosystems and mature the advisory. I helped launch the token. We ended up launching on Binance last year. We peaked out at 3.5 billion valuation. So it went relatively well. And then there's some other platforms, decentralized GPU access called Lilypad I'm advisor on, some other AI agents I'm advisors on, and then I also have my own project, which is content generation, video generation. Like I was an interim CTO at a media company that Seven West Media invested in as well. So, and my very first startup when I was at university, I had a VCR and I was digitizing videotapes. Yeah, and trying to.
I remember videotapes, Darren. I'm not that young.
Yeah. So VCR tapes. So I might be dating myself a little bit. Some people won't even know what that is. But
we do that.
Yeah. So I think that there's a massive opportunity there. I do think that the fiat system is too slow, and the credit-based credit card system is not the system that will support that. So this is where more like the alts. But I see these highly speculative, but similar to like Web 2. Where when a startup comes, it's super speculative, right? You've got no idea if it's going to work. High failure rate, 9 out of 10 startups fail. They do not go through, maybe more than that. And the ones that win really well, okay? So I think Bitcoin is has a proven asset. It was super speculative when I got involved, but it's a proven asset. Happy to get my mum and dad to put money into there. But when you go down into these altcoin ones, then I think you're really going down that risk profile. And if you want to go to the casino, like I like the casino, I'm not going to say not to go to the casino, but you should know you're going to the casino if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, and that's like going down the altcoin.
Yeah, down into the altcoins. I like something that's actually got some utility. But then don't get me wrong, I still like meme coins. I think they're funny, but I look at them like slot machines, not like long-term holdings. But if I think about an AI agent that can move at the speed of compute, it needs a money system that can move at the speed of compute as well, right? So it needs like on-chain, and we can create like a decentralized compute layer where anything can talk to anything and basically prepay without setting up an account and getting Visa and MasterCard to be the arbiters of who's allowed to do anything, because they cut your payment rails, you're off the network. And I don't believe in that. I believe more in my cyberpunk roots that people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do, and there should not be some third party basically saying, you can't do that, or I want my slice before you're allowed to do business, right? So I think that is like a big movement, but don't be surprised that there's still a lot of speculative nonsense in the altcoins, in the AI space. There's a bunch of projects that I think are just vaporware, but we had that in Web 2. So I'm not going to say, to me, it's just like the same stuff happens in traditional business. You just don't see it. Now, I'm not a fan of that either. There's a thing called like sophisticated investor rules. So like in Australia, I think it's now you need $3 million in assets before you're allowed to see pitches from private companies doing startups. Now, it is high risk, but that is like the highest value curve, which is that highly speculative, and you're locked out of those, right? And I think that is unfair. Like all you're allowed to do is buy into well-established companies and into property, which I think are like bubblicious. But you're not allowed to invest in something that can actually generate outsized returns. And I think that is treating people like children. And I think like crypto and Bitcoin is like, no, I'm going to treat you like an adult. You are responsible for your own financial system. I don't believe people are going to come save you. I think it's up to you to look after yourself, more in the libertarian side. And I think that we need to stop pretending that it's that someone's going to look after them. Like, I also believe the super system is going to get raided. I think it's not going to do anything that it wants. I also believe it inflates assets and is not necessarily has the net effect that people think it does.
Let me pull you up there, because you opened up, you've just unlocked something there, which is something that's very dear to me, which is happening right now, right before our very eyes, and that is Labor's proposal of unrealized capital gains tax above $3 million. Now, this works in a couple of different ways. One is that, I mean, obviously I'm not approving of what I consider the theft of our money. Unrealized capital gains to me is just absolute insanity. But also there's reports about that people who have those funds, self-managed super, let's say, they invest a lot of money in startups, and potentially if this capital gains tax, this unrealized capital gains tax comes in, the funding into these startups is basically going to dry up.
I would agree that that's going to happen. I think taxing unrealized gains is just crazy, right? I think fundamentally it's flawed. My biggest problem with the Australian governments, the uni party of Labour and Liberal, which has been in power for a very long time, is that they exclude themselves from nearly all of these. It's rules for thee, not for me, right? And that has been one of my major frustrations. There's, trying to do control over the internet, control over your money systems, control over everything, and now control over your retirement. I don't believe it was indexed either.
It's not indexed.
Which means that while I inflate the money supply, there's a line and I'm going to push you all over it, okay? So I just think that we are moving into more of like a bastardized socialism mechanism, and the perception that government is free money. It's not free money. It's your money. It's my money. I pay tax. You pay tax. Everyone pays tax. And that sort of basic economic understanding of government spending requires higher taxes, and those higher taxes are going to impact you and impact your cost of living while potentially driving up assets. I think that they're the fundamental sort of building blocks that people need to comprehend, because when they set that bar so far in the future, they're like, do you have 3 million in super? Then you don't need to worry about this, right? And then it drops and the prices go up and your stock portfolio increases because we've halved the value of money. So now everything's worth twice as much. And now your asset base goes up. Now you have to pay money, right? Never mind who decides on those values. If you think about a startup, right? Let's say that you did invest through your super, and I know people who have invested through their self-managed super into startups, and you're completely right. They will have to sell down assets and they will not have that capital available to them. In that instance, I have a paper value, right? Which is the money that I raise in order to do what I want. Now, most startups are early stage companies, and this is the same while people launch tokens as well. A lot of times it's to bring capital in to build out. So I can generate revenue at this level, but I've got a cost base potentially higher than that, especially if you start talking about AI engineers, right? They're expensive as compute power is really expensive. But if I hit a scale that the cost goes above, the profit goes above that cost line, and now I've got a business that can actually generate money, and that's normally in the future, not today. Now, the banking system does not give loans to businesses. It just doesn't, right? It only loans against existing assets. So that sort of technology-driven sector is starved of capital and will impact it if people with capital, which they can afford to lose, are not putting those in. And we're just bricks and holes in Australia. Like, our economy is just increase population, buy houses, or dig shit out of the ground, right? And none of those are generating the economic wealth, or the fact that I employ someone locally, they put money in their local restaurant, right? And that money circles around, sort of the velocity of money stuff, versus if I just pay my mortgage, that rent, which goes to the mortgage, that money just disappears off into the international markets, right? It does not add the same amount of value. Or we have gas, for example, which there's no resource taxes and goes to Japan, and they sell it on, and the profits are made by the multinational in Japan with no taxes. So I worry that our structured system is set up for value exploitation at the current generation, and it's really sort of a credit card bill that my kids and your kids will have to pay, right? And I don't know how to fix that without something like Bitcoin, without having the ability to step out and have another asset. But don't be surprised, like they'll try to tax that too, right?
Oh, I have no doubt.
Because it's much easier to spend other people's money.
Of course. I've been doing a lot of social media, Darren, about this issue, because what I advocate for is actually, and I've done this myself, so I'm not just talking about it, I've moved all of my money out of my industry super fund into a self-managed super fund, and I've allocated every single cent into Bitcoin.
Yep.
So that's what I'm holding for the long term. So I'm all in.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not stuffing about.
Well, I have a family trust that holds my assets, and I work full-time in crypto. So my wife said, can we not put all of the super in crypto as well? And I'm a bit like...
You said, why? What are you talking about?
I'm like, if you don't want us to, I will not put everything in crypto. She's like, I would be happier. I said, we'll be poorer, but you can be happier. So it's a compromise.
It is a compromise. And I have a wife too, Darren, and we have this same discussion. Although, my wife was on board eventually, because I think it becomes... You go down the rabbit hole, and then you prove it, and then it sort of wasn't something you thought about for 6 months, and then you ditched it, right? It was something that we invested a lot of money into. It wasn't day one that we said, let's move our super over, right? Because that conversation would have been a lot harder. It's like what you said before about maybe introducing people to the Fiat standard book before you give them the Bitcoin standard book, right? Give them a little piece at a time. And so eventually the timing was right. And I said, look, these are the returns that I would expect from Bitcoin. This is what we're getting in industry super fund. And it was basically then it was like, okay, so that required me though to give her the right information. She had to trust me that we were doing the right thing for our family. I actually have 3 buckets, Darren. I have a company bucket, so all my company that generates cash, I moved that. It's almost like a Michael Saylor play really, but I've moved all that into Bitcoin, then the super fund, then I have just some personal stuff as well. And I think this is the big worry, is that if this unrealized capital gains tax comes through, and keep in mind too, the Greens want to lower the threshold down to 2 million, not 3 million. I fear that they'll say that honeypot was too easy to get. We've basically got an open slather now for probably the next 2 cycles of elections to run. And let's go after now trusts. Let's go after company assets. The door swings wide open, and who's there to stop them? Basically nothing. And it will be said under the guise of, well, we need to make the system fairer. We can't have companies that are earning more money than this other company, and and this person over here is earning more money, so we have to make it fairer. They've got to bring everybody down to the lowest common denominator.
Equitable is what they'll be saying.
Equitable. Yeah. We need to fund more hospitals. We need to fund more roads. Be all these excuses.
I very much agree with you. I think that sound economic management has went out the window. I know some people in Victoria, and I think it's cooked as a state, right? I think I've seen people's land taxes go through the roof because they had to pay for their massive lockdowns, their excessive expenditures on public spending projects that were atrociously badly managed and ineffective. And we used to have, the recession we need to have. We used to have, economic management front and center. And recently it's been like, who's going to give me the biggest tax break, right? How am I going to get more free stuff? Who's going to spend this money? And I believe we need a smaller government, not a bigger government. I believe some programs that are well-intentioned have extremely negative outcomes, right? When you look through, that sounds like a good idea, and then into the implementation and the rollout of those benefits, that business case does not match what you were sold at the start. And I think that will be the same on these taxes. But I want us to spend less money, and I want us to pay down our debts, right? If you're in debt, right, you cannot think clearly because you have this thing sitting on your shoulder that you have to feed and look after. And it controls you to a certain degree. And the larger those debts go from governments and states and so forth, the more decisions they're going to make to fulfill those obligations, less focused on the benefits of those decisions, right? So I think that you are right that there will be continued tax on investments and on businesses. I think super's like $3 trillion or something in Australia.
Yeah,
Money
3 or 4
pot
trillion. It's huge.
is too big for the government not to take it, right? They will figure out ways to reach in and grab that money. Okay, I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. I think this type of taxing the withdrawal of the super money. I also I also believe that the super industry is part of the property bubble problem, because we've got banks who primarily lend to property, right? Like 60% of their book is all lending to residential commercial property. Then you've got the super funds who are building the properties, and your money's going in to prop those up. And then they own assets, and then they own the banks, right? So we have this sort of incestuous system where rising property prices, which is very bad for a country that has got a population increase that's outstripping the properties coming to market. So you've got demand, inflated demand, okay? And then you've got money printing, devaluation of money, because the creation of every new mortgage creates new debt, which creates new money, which increases the denominator, which then devalues everything. So lots of new mortgages increases the money supply, which then flows through to create sort of a devaluation of everything. And this system has been pumping hard for over a decade now, and it's almost at a stage where it's too big to fail, if you understand what I mean, because of the consequential issues. Like, I joke that if you want to be untouchable, you need to become too big to fail, right? But say I'm completely wrong, right? I'm completely and utterly wrong. There's the saying where your markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay liquid. Okay, so I'm not saying things are going to end tomorrow. I think there's so much incentivization around the current system and the people that it's very unlikely we're going to see any meaningful changes in the short term. There's not a decision point. We're not in like an Argentinian level crunch where you need to feel pain before you're willing to change, if that makes sense. So I expect it to continue on, but I expect property investments to become harder, less profitable. As more and more people are renters, I expect controls on property to increase from the nanny state, which is excessively nanny state, and I don't see that letting up. You know what I mean? Censorship rules, age restrictions, money controls. I just see us going down this, social scoring system, and I don't see us stopping anytime soon. So what's your lifeboat? I think it's orange.
Well, that's exactly right. I always say Bitcoin is the answer.
It's the only answer. It's the only answer within your reach, right?
Yeah.
I think it's the only answer where I can get on a plane, I can remember my seed phrase, I can walk through customs, and I can move capital out of the country if I needed to, right? Worst case scenario, right? Anything else can be seized, can be taken. You can have your assets taken. Like, I had an issue with an accountant who stole some money, but it was tax money. And then the ATO said, you still owe me the money. And I've already paid this. And they're like, yeah, but you paid it to someone who ran away with the money. And I'm like, okay.
Far out.
I'm like, all right, okay. And then they said, well, you need to prove your innocence. And I'm like, excuse me? I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing, that the tax office could put the burden of proof on me to prove now, I did prove my innocence, but it was an economically costly event for me to prove I didn't do anything wrong. And so I think that, the government control and mechanisms need some counters, right? Like, I wish the Liberal Party were actually liberals, if you know what I mean, in the more American sense of liberty.
Well, an opposition.
Yeah. I think there's an organization called Stand with Crypto, which came out of the US. There's now an Australian branch. I was at some of their events, some of the people. They're trying to get people to change their minds around what is crypto, what is Bitcoin, how it's not a bad thing. The success of pro-Bitcoin people in the US is now starting to bring politicians. There's a back so much incentivization around existing donor class people that it's very unlikely to see any meaningful changes in the short term. There's not a decision point. We're not. They primarily care about winning. I expect. I believe like over the next couple of cycles, less profitable. Bitcoiners, as more and more people are renters, I expect controls will become a larger to increase from the nanny state, which is you cannot buy a tiny bit of a house, and I don't see that. You can buy $20. You know what I mean? Censorship rules, age restrictions,
genius idea.
Money controls.
We should start up our own political party. It's called
social scoring
the Bitcoiners Party,
and I don't see us
and it'll be completely backed by Bitcoin.
So what's your life?
Which means we'll have
I think it's
endless resources into the
exactly
future
right. I
to
always
fund
say
campaigns.
Bitcoin is the answer.
It's the only answer.
That we have.
It's the only answer.
Darren,
last year, the Liberals and Labour partnered with the Greens to suppress smaller party funding. So the current uni parties are trying to suppress other parties. So they changed the funding rules and set the funding caps. And you need branches, you need all the things that they have, and are limiting the ability for the tails and any other minor party, Libertarian Party, any of those others. Because the Libertarians do have some interesting policies. I just sometimes think we're a little too rapid in our explanations of those. And I say that we're talking to people inside the tent rather than people outside the tent, where you sort of need buddy Jesus, you know what I mean, to come in, to sort of welcome you in before you get the full sermon of all the things that are wrong. But it will be difficult. Like if you look at the Liberal Party as a shambles at the moment, I think taking them over might be the best option. Creating pro-Bitcoin under 30 individuals who understand the internet, see the problems with the financial systems, and see the opportunity that Australia has on a global stage. We are so smart. We have such talented individuals here. Lots of people building in Bitcoin, crypto, and our government has been very anti it. You know, most people just don't talk about it. It's like Fight Club. You know, it was like, like the first rule of being a Bitcoiner, you don't talk about being a Bitcoiner.
Yeah. Right? Darren, I've got to wrap up the conversation because we're running out of time.
No problem.
It's one that we can pick up at any other time because I love talking about politics, and especially how it relates into the crypto and Bitcoin space as well. And I really do think that out of this, really, Bitcoin is the answer. Rather than going deep into what I'd love to do is actually just acknowledge the Gold Coast blockchain meetup. So if anyone is in the Gold Coast area, I'm going to leave a link somewhere. We'll get in contact with you. We'll look some links so we can actually share that if that's okay. Is it a paid membership, or is it people just show up?
Free. I'm the main sponsor. Been sponsoring for over 4 years. Okay. I have an event coming up there's actually a conference that I got to come to the Gold Coast. It used to be Blockchain Australia, then I called DECA. So industry people, even the mayor speaking at it, ministers. It's more than Bitcoin. Let's be clear. It's not just Bitcoin only. The Digital Economy Council of Australia, I think is what DECA stands for. But I'm a believer in building businesses. I'm a believer in economic uplift through creation, not through taxation. All right. So that's on the 16th of June. So check out the website, decaconference.com, and come along and follow me on Twitter, and you'll be able to see the next upcoming event, which is at a brewery, at the new Surfers Microbrewery. I got sponsors, drinks, beers. Come talk about Bitcoin.
That's like everyone's favorite topic. That's my favorite topic. I'm not a huge beer fan, but I will tell you, I'd love to come along just to talk more. Just to talk Bitcoin.
Yeah, they have 14 beers. 12 of them I thought were very nice.
Yeah, I think you tried them all. There you go. Darren Rogan, thank you so much for your time today, and I really look forward to speaking to you again in the future. And everyone should check out Darren on his X, and also try and get along to his Gold Coast blockchain meetup. Thanks so much, Darren.
No problem. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Crypto Collective. If you've enjoyed this episode, the best way to show your support is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode. You can also find more of me at I'm Matthew Fraser on all social media platforms.